The day had come to an end, but for Markel Davis the night held only darkness. He stood outside the lavish estate of the Mallory family, hands trembling from both exhaustion and fear. For months he had been their servant, scraping by with every humiliating task they assigned. Tonight, however, would be different. As the grand doors of the estate swung open, Henry Mallory, the spoiled heir of the family, smirked at Markel, his eyes gleaming with disdain. "Still out here, Davis?" Henry taunted. "Maybe if you work a little harder, you'll get a scrap from our table one day." The laughter of Henry's friends echoed behind him like a cruel chorus. Markel's face flushed with shame, but he said nothing. Beneath the layers of poverty, humiliation, and unspoken anger, Markel's resolve slowly began to harden. His eyes, full of the weight of years spent beneath their cruelty, flickered with something new: defiance. He would no longer stand by as their mockery crushed his spirit. Not anymore. A truth long hidden was ready to break free. The evening air grew colder as Markel Davis walked away from the Mallory estate, the sounds of laughter still echoing in his ears. He had been humiliated again, his pride trampled beneath their mockery. Every step he took was heavy, filled with the weight of years spent as nothing more than a servant. Markel knew he could never leave, not with his mother, Laura, depending on him. But tonight, something had shifted within him. For the first time, he saw the world through new eyes, eyes that burned with the desire to change his fate. He would not bow to them any longer. He would find a way to make them see him, not as the servant, not as the one they mocked, but as someone worthy of respect, even if it meant burning down the life they had forced him to endure. Tonight was the first step toward his redemption. As Markel entered the small apartment he shared with his mother, Laura, he was greeted by the soft, quiet hum of the radio. Laura, a woman of 50, sat at the small kitchen table, her hands busy with the evening's chores. Her frail frame, worn by years of hard labor, seemed to shrink in the dim light of their humble home. She looked up at him, her tired eyes filled with quiet concern. "Markel," she said softly, "I saw you outside the Mallory play. What did they do this time?" Markel hesitated for a moment, the anger still simmering inside him. But he forced a smile and sat down beside her, not wanting to burden her further. "Nothing, Mom, just the usual." But even as he spoke, a storm of thoughts raged within him. He couldn't keep hiding from the truth, not anymore. He had to find a way out of this life, for both of them. Laura's hands paused in their work and she stared at Markel, her eyes searching his face. "You can't keep taking their cruelty, Markel," she said, her voice tinged with both sadness and concern. "I don't want to see you broken like this." Markel looked down, avoiding her gaze. The weight of his mother's worry pressed against him, a reminder of all he had tried to protect her from. "I know, Mom," he replied, his voice heavy, "but what else can I do? I can't change who I am or where we are." Laura sighed, her expression softening as she reached out to touch his hand. "You're more than that, Markel. You've always been more." The words were a comfort, but Markel knew the truth. No matter how hard he worked, he could never escape the life they had forced him into. Until tonight. That night, Markel couldn't sleep. He lay in his small, narrow bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, his mind racing. He thought of Henry Mallory, his smirk, his laughter. Markel had been his servant for so long, but the anger he felt now was different. It was sharper. It was a promise to himself. If he didn't do something, he would lose everything, not just his dignity, but his future. Markel knew that to change their fate, he would have to confront the Mallorys head-on. He didn't know how yet, but he was ready to face them. He would no longer be the quiet servant. He would be a man, ready to take back what they had stolen. The morning light crept through the torn curtains of the Davis apartment. Markel Davis sat by the window, staring out at the city below. The echoes of last night's laughter still haunted his thoughts. He could almost hear Henry Mallory's voice, sharp and cruel. Laura Davis moved quietly behind him, her steps light but her eyes heavy with worry. "You didn't sleep again," she said softly. Markel turned toward her, forcing a faint smile. "Sleep doesn't change anything, Mom," he said. "They'll still treat us like dust tomorrow." Laura placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch steady. "But dust can rise with the wind, Markel. Don't let them see you break." Her voice, frail yet firm, gave him the strength he didn't know he still had. Later that morning, Markel walked through the narrow alleys of the working district. The smell of iron and oil filled the air. He stopped by the factory where he spent most of his days, its walls stained with years of sweat. The foreman, Richard Haynes, barked orders at the men without looking at their faces. "You're late again, Davis," he shouted. Markel lowered his head but didn't respond. As he walked to his post, the clang of machinery drowned his thoughts. The world of labor was harsh, unforgiving, and endless. Yet deep inside, a silent fire began to stir. One that even Richard's shouting couldn't extinguish. During his short lunch break, Markel sat alone on a wooden crate, unwrapping a small sandwich Laura had packed for him. Around him, the other workers talked and laughed, but their joy felt distant. His mind wandered to his mother, to her tired hands, to the life she had endured for him. He remembered her words that morning, "Dust can rise with the wind." He repeated them under his breath, tasting their strength. When his co-worker, Samuel Brooks, approached and offered him a smile, Markel forced one in return. "You'll see better days, Davis," Samuel said. But Markel didn't answer. He only stared at the horizon through the factory gates, where sunlight broke through the clouds. When Markel returned home that evening, the apartment was quiet. Laura Davis sat by the window, mending his torn shirt by candlelight. "You work too hard," she said softly, not looking up. "You need rest." Markel stood in the doorway, watching her with a mix of love and guilt. "I have to keep going," he replied. "If I stop, they win." Laura finally looked at him, her eyes glistening. "They only win when you stop being kind, Markel." Her words sank deep into his heart. He sat beside her, watching her thread the needle with trembling fingers. It was then he realized. His mother's strength was not loud, but it was unbreakable. Late that night, Markel walked out into the narrow street behind their apartment. The air was cool, and the moonlight shimmered on the puddles left by a passing rain. He stood alone, his thoughts swirling like the clouds above. He thought of the Mallory family, of Henry Mallory's sneer, of the world that refused to see his worth. The anger that once burned now turned into resolve. The witness, an old neighbor named Elias Turner, watched quietly from his porch. "You've got fire in your eyes, Markel," Elias said softly. Markel didn't turn around. "It's time they saw the truth, Mr. Turner." His voice was calm, but his heart thundered like a drum. The tension in Markel Davis' life grew as the days passed. Every glance from Henry Mallory felt like an assault. Henry had begun to take every opportunity to belittle him, mocking his work ethic, his clothes, his very presence. The mansion's doors loomed before him every day, a reminder of the world he could never fully enter. Markel's anger, though quiet, was now a constant companion, burning beneath his skin. One afternoon, as he labored beneath the relentless sun, Henry passed by with a smirk, as if he owned the very air Markel breathed. "Still here, Davis?" Henry sneered. Markel's fists clenched, but his lips remained sealed. He had to be patient. He had a plan, and he would not let Henry break him. He could see the cracks in Henry's confidence, and that was where his strength would grow. The constant humiliation weighed heavily on Markel, but the final straw came when Henry mocked his mother, Laura Davis. One afternoon, Henry had come to visit the estate, his friends in tow. They laughed as they spoke about their wealth, their carefree lives, while Markel worked nearby. Henry, feeling superior as always, commented loudly, "You're just like your mother, Davis. She's nothing but a shadow, just like you." Markel froze, his heart pounding with rage. Laura had worked her entire life to protect him, to shield him from their cruelty. The pain of hearing her insulted was too much. But this time Markel didn't turn away. This time, his resolve hardened like steel. He would no longer endure the insults. It was time to fight back. That night, Markel lay awake, his fists still clenched in his bed. The words Henry had spoken kept repeating in his mind. He could no longer stay silent. He had allowed them to see him as weak, as beneath them, for too long. Markel knew he couldn't fight the Mallorys head-on. He didn't have their wealth or their power. But he had something they didn't: knowledge. The estate's workers, those who had served the Mallorys for years, had shared whispers with him. Secrets about the family's hidden dealings, about the weaknesses that Markel could use to his advantage. It was time to gather those secrets, to use them to expose Henry for the fraud he was. This would be the turning point. He would not be a shadow anymore. The next day, Markel made a decision. He had learned that Henry Mallory was about to host a grand party at the estate. The event would be the perfect opportunity to gather information, to move among the guests unnoticed. Markel had no intention of being a servant at this event. Instead, he would act as an observer. He'd slip into the heart of their world, listen to their conversations, and collect the evidence he needed to bring them down. The guests would be too distracted by their own wealth and status to notice him. It was a dangerous game, but Markel had learned to play it. He had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. As Markel slipped into the mansion's grand hall, he was acutely aware of every movement, every conversation. The guests were dressed in their finest clothes, laughing and drinking champagne, oblivious to the tension lurking just beneath the surface. Markel moved through the crowd, careful not to draw attention. He overheard snippets of conversation, talk of investments, luxury, and power. But then, his ears caught something that made his heart race. A conversation between two of Henry's associates about a deal that could ruin the Mallory family's reputation. Markel leaned in closer, silently memorizing every detail. This was the leverage he needed. It was time to expose Henry Mallory for what he truly was. Markel Davis had never been one to ask questions about his past. His life had always been defined by the present, surviving, working, providing for his mother, Laura Davis. But the more he gathered information about the Mallory family, the more things didn't add up. One evening, after gathering documents he had swiped from Henry Mallory's study, Markel found an old letter hidden within a file. The letter was addressed to someone named Evelyn Davis, and it was signed by the Mallory patriarch. His heart skipped. The letter was dated from years ago. The name Evelyn Davis echoed in Markel's mind. He'd heard it before, in passing conversations. Was it possible? Was there a connection between his family and the Mallorys that he had never known? This discovery set in motion a dangerous realization. Markel might be tied to the wealth and legacy of the Mallory family in a way he never expected. The discovery gnawed at Markel's mind as he tried to make sense of what he had uncovered. He approached Laura Davis that evening, his voice shaking with uncertainty. "Mom, I found something today. A letter." A letter. It was addressed to someone named Evelyn Davis, and it's connected to the Mallorys. Laura's hands trembled as she continued washing the dishes, avoiding his gaze. I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, her voice distant. Markel pushed forward, pressing her for answers. "What aren't you telling me, Mom? Why does my name come up in their history? Tell me the truth." Tears welled up in Laura's eyes as she finally turned to face him. "Markel, your father was a Mallory. You were never meant to know, but I couldn't protect you from this forever. The Mallorys are your family. The truth hit Markel like a blow to the chest, leaving him speechless. The man he had spent his life hating, the very family who had crushed him, was his own blood. In the days that followed, Markel's world felt like it was falling apart. The revelation that his father was a Mallory caused a deep internal conflict. How could he reconcile the man he had despised with the family he had been raised to hate? The more he thought about it, the more he realized the Mallorys had treated him with contempt, not because he was a stranger to them, but because they knew who he truly was. They had tried to erase him from their legacy. Markel's focus shifted. His anger wasn't just toward Henry Mallory now, but toward the entire family who had kept him hidden in the shadows. He had been overlooked, discarded, and now they would all see him. He wasn't their servant anymore. He was the rightful heir. Markel's plan began to take shape. He would use his newfound knowledge to confront Henry Mallory and expose the family's secrets. He wasn't going to beg for respect. He was going to take it. He visited the estate once more, this time with a sense of purpose. As he walked through the halls, he no longer saw the grandiose decor or the wealth that had once seemed out of reach. He saw the lies, the corruption, and the family that had cast him aside. He approached Henry Mallory, who stood in the grand dining room, sipping his drink. Markel's voice was calm, but the anger was there, simmering beneath the surface. "I know who I am, Henry. I know what you did to me, and now I'm here to take back what's mine." Henry turned, shocked, his confident facade faltering as Markel stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. The confrontation between Markel and Henry Mallory left the entire estate in shock. The power dynamic had shifted. The Mallory family's carefully constructed image was now cracking. Markel stood before them, holding the evidence that could ruin them all. He had the documents, the secrets, and the truth. With every word he spoke, Henry's confident mask slipped further. "You thought you could bury me," Markel said, his voice low but firm. "You thought I was nothing, but I'm your blood. And now I'm going to take what's mine." Henry's face turned pale as Markel revealed the letter, the final proof of his heritage. The entire room stood in stunned silence, the weight of Markel's revelation crushing the Mallory legacy in an instant. The confrontation between Markel Davis and the Mallory family reached its peak. Inside the grand dining room, the air was thick with tension as Markel stood tall, holding the damning documents in his hand. Henry Mallory, 30, still recovering from the shock of Markel's revelation, now tried to regain his composure. The room, once filled with laughter and luxury, felt hollow. The Mallory patriarch stood frozen, unable to hide the panic in his eyes. "You think you can bring down everything we've built?" Henry sneered. Markel's voice cut through the room, steady and calm. "I'm not here to destroy. I'm here to take what's mine. You've already stolen enough." The truth had been laid bare. Markel was no longer a shadow. He was the heir to the Mallory fortune, and nothing would stop him now. Markel's eyes locked onto Henry's, the weight of his words sinking into the silence that enveloped the room. He had always been dismissed, mocked, but now the Mallory family's world was crumbling under the truth he carried. The patriarch, a figure who had once commanded respect, now stood in front of Markel like a man exposed. "You think this will change anything?" the patriarch muttered, trying to mask his fear with arrogance. But Markel could see through it. "It changes everything. It changes who I am and who you are," Markel replied, his voice unwavering. The room remained still, as if time itself had stopped. In that moment, the Mallorys knew. The tables had turned, and there was no going back. As Markel stood at the center of their world, he realized the power he held. Every word he spoke now carried the weight of truth. He had come from nothing, a forgotten son, and now he was standing in the heart of their empire. The Mallory family was built on lies, on hidden truths. but Markel had the key to their undoing. "I'm done being invisible," Markel said, his voice sharp and cutting through the silence. "This is my inheritance, my birthright. You want to erase me again?" The Mallorys were no longer in control. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and Markel would claim what was rightfully his. Markel stepped forward, the document still in his hand, his grip tightening. He had all the leverage he needed now. He could feel the power shift in the room as the Mallory family's confidence began to falter. Henry Mallory attempted to regain control, his voice shaking as he tried to dismiss the truth. Markel had uncovered. "This means nothing. You have nothing," Henry spat. Markel's eyes narrowed. "I have everything," he said, his voice low but fierce. "And soon you'll have nothing." The air crackled with the finality of his words. The Mallorys were no longer in control of their own fate. Markel was. As Markel turned to leave the room, his steps were calm but resolute. The Mallorys were powerless to stop him now. Henry Mallory's voice cracked as he called out to Markel. "You'll regret this. You can't just walk away from all of this," he shouted. Markel paused, his back still turned to them. "I've spent my life regretting nothing. You're the ones who'll regret ever crossing me." With those final words he walked out, leaving the Mallorys to face the consequences of their actions. The family's empire had already begun to crumble, and Markel had set the wheels of justice in motion. No longer was he the shadow. Now he was the storm. The air in the Mallory estate had shifted. After Markel Davis' bold stand, the Mallory family's facade had cracked. The public now knew what had been hidden for years, that Markel was the rightful heir to the fortune. The Mallorys had tried to bury him, to keep him as nothing but a shadow of their past. But now, there was no hiding. Henry Mallory, 30, and his father, the patriarch, sat in the grand study, facing the fallout. Their once untouchable empire was crumbling. The news of Markel's true lineage had spread like wildfire, and the press was on their doorstep. "How did we let this happen?" Henry muttered, his voice full of disbelief. The patriarch, once confident, looked aged and fragile, his authority shattered. "You underestimated him," Markel's voice echoed from the door. He entered the room, his presence commanding, his resolve stronger than ever. "And now, I will take what is mine." Markel walked deeper into the study, his eyes never leaving the Mallorys. The room, once a symbol of their power, now felt suffocating. "You thought you could hide me," Markel began, his voice cutting through the silence, "but the truth always finds its way to the surface." The Mallory patriarch opened his mouth to speak, but Markel raised a hand, silencing him. "This isn't about revenge. It's about taking what belongs to me. You've had everything, my birthright, my dignity, my name. But no longer. The time for pretending is over." As Markel spoke, Henry's face twisted in anger, but the patriarch's expression was a mix of fear and regret. Markel was not a child anymore. He was the man who would reshape their world. The weight of the Mallory family's legacy hung heavy in the room, but Markel remained steady. As the tension thickened, the patriarch finally spoke, his voice raspy. "You don't understand what you're stepping into, Markel. The Mallorys aren't just a family. We're an institution. You can't just walk in and take over." Markel's lips curled into a faint smile. "Watch me." With those words, he turned to leave, but not before addressing Henry. "You'll have to answer for your cruelty, Henry. You've built your life on the backs of people like my mother, and now I'll make sure the truth is known." The Mallorys were left speechless, their empire on the verge of collapse. As Markel walked out of the Mallory estate, the world outside seemed different. The air felt fresher, the city alive with possibilities. He knew the battle wasn't over. There would be obstacles, challenges, and resistance. But the Mallorys had underestimated him, and now they would see the power of the truth. Markel's journey was far from complete. The road ahead was uncharted, but it was his. As he walked through the gates of the Mallory estate, his mind was clear. The wealth, the legacy, it was all in his hands now, and he was going to shape it into something new, something just. Markel stood before the gathered media, his posture confident and poised. The reporters were eager, their cameras flashing as he prepared to speak. The world was watching. "I stand here not as a victim, but as a man who claims what is his," Markel began, his voice strong. "For too long, the Mallorys and families like them have used their power to oppress the less fortunate. They've stolen from people like my mother, people like me, but no more. This is the beginning of a new chapter, one where power will be accountable to those it has harmed." His words were met with stunned silence, then applause. The Mallorys' empire was broken, and Markel was now the man who would rebuild it, on his terms. The sun was setting as Markel Davis stood on the steps of the newly acquired Mallory estate, the world outside filled with both promise and challenge. The Mallory family's empire had fallen, but the power vacuum left in its wake was now his to shape. The press had moved on to the next story, but the legacy Markel had reclaimed was just beginning. "It's not just about the money," he thought to himself. "It's about rebuilding what was broken." He had a vision, one where the wealth and power of the Mallorys would no longer be used to oppress others, but to create a foundation for those who had been left behind. His mother, Laura Davis, stood behind him, her presence a quiet reminder of the sacrifices made. She had always believed in him, and now he would honor that belief, reshaping the future for them both. Inside the estate, Markel had begun the arduous task of rebuilding. The rooms that once symbolized excess and arrogance were now being transformed into spaces for those who needed them the most. "This will be a home for others," Markel said, his voice steady as he stood before the contractors. "This house will no longer stand for the greed that once filled its halls. It will stand for something better." Laura Davis watched from the doorway, a small smile on her lips. She had always known that Markel would make a difference, and now she saw it beginning to take shape. The weight of their past had been heavy, but it was the promise of a new beginning that now filled their hearts. As the estate's transformation continued, Markel found himself in the heart of the community, meeting with leaders, workers, and activists who had always been on the outskirts of society. The once distant figure of the Mallorys was now someone who could be trusted. Markel had made it his mission to invest in the very people who had once been ignored. "This isn't about charity," Markel told the group. "This is about equity. Everyone here deserves a chance to thrive." The leaders nodded in agreement, seeing in him not just the heir to the Mallory fortune, but a man of genuine integrity. It was a new chapter for both the estate and the people it would serve. Months passed, and the changes Markel had set into motion began to show tangible results. The estate was no longer a fortress of wealth, but a thriving community hub. Children from the neighborhood played in the gardens that had once been exclusive to the Mallorys. Workers who had been employed in menial tasks now held positions of power within the estate's new initiatives. Markel watched it all with pride, but he knew there was still work to be done. "This is only the beginning," he said to Laura, who stood by his side. "We've made progress, but there's more to do. We can't stop now." Laura smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "I knew you could do it, Markel, and I'll be with you every step of the way." As the years passed, Markel Davis became not just a symbol of success, but of transformation. His name was no longer linked solely to the Mallory family's wealth, but to the community he had nurtured and uplifted. The estate, now a beacon of opportunity, stood as a testament to what could happen when power was used for good. "You did it, Markel," Laura said, her voice full of pride as they looked out over the thriving estate. Markel smiled, but his thoughts were elsewhere. "We did it," he replied, his voice steady, "and we're just getting started." The legacy of the Mallorys had been rewritten, not by inheritance, but by the work of a son who had refused to stay in the shadows. And as he stood there, the future stretched out before him, full of promise and possibility.